as well. All right, we're recording. Well, there we go. Thank you, Maggie. All right, so this is what we're going through today, and this is our goal. We want to go through as far as the Wisconsin residential offer to purchase, and we want to go ahead and do that. We're pretty much going to go through line for line and go through what it means, so we're writing out these documents correctly. And Jen, so you know, this is being recorded. So other people can go ahead and use it in the future and stuff like that as well. And
sorry, you're gonna have to watch me eat.
Oh, that's perfectly fine. That's new. And let's just go ahead and kick this off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to screen share the document itself and go through it. All right. Jen, are you able to see that? Excellent. All right, so we have the WB11, the residential offer to purchase. This very first portion on here is you put the date. So this is the date that you're drafting the offer. So you go ahead and you put that there. The next portion that we go ahead and have is where it says agent to the buyer, agent to the seller, / listing firm, or agent to the buyer and seller. This is very important. So what you're supposed to do is strike a line through the items that you are not. So if you're representing the seller or the listing firm, or if you're representing both buyer and seller, you're a dual agent, you would cross those lines out and you'd be agent to the buyer. If you went ahead and agreed to different terms with your clients and you're the agent to the seller, that's what you would go ahead and leave open here. The reason why the state of Wisconsin has this right up in front is the simple fact is when the seller is looking at this offer, they know as far as if who the agent is working for on the behalf of. So it's very important to go ahead and fill that portion out. The next portion here, line 3, where it says buyer. Another thing here, you want to go ahead and put the person's name or corporate identity, however you want, however the buyer wants this to look like on the deed and at the courthouse, at the county, is what you want to go ahead and put here. So it's important that you have the spelling correct. It's important to go ahead and have the, if they're putting it in a trust or anything like that, that it's identified here. You can always go ahead, typically change it once you have an accepted offer, but it's a lot easier if you have it done up front. This next portion here, line 4 and 5, this is where you put the address of the property. So we're putting the street address. So this next portion on line 6, this is either city, village, township. Is this in the village? Is it in the city limits? Is it in the township? Is it out in the country? The reason why this is, you want to go ahead and make sure you have this correct because it could be different than the address of the property on that. So to go ahead and check on that, you want to go ahead and pull up the county records, and you should do that anyways, just to go ahead and see what the taxes are and look at the borders and stuff like that on the county website, and it'll tell you that. So this is, you put city, village, township, of whatever that is. And then county of, if you're in Polk County, St. Croix County, Pierce County, wherever you're doing business, you would put the county on that. Purchase price. So here on line 9, those that remember writing out checks, or if you still write out checks, this is where you write in the number. If that's $458,975, you would write that there. And then in here, you would write the actual dollar amount. So using the numeral numbers on that. Items included in the purchase price, very important area here. So this is where you want to go ahead and put all the appliances that are included. So if the washer, dryer, refrigerator, all of those items you want to go ahead and put in this area. Other things also, if you have a pool on the property, you're going to want to put pool equipment. If there's a hot tub on the property, you may want to put the hot tub down. This is an area where you don't want to miss anything. Also, if there's a propane tank, or I'm going to say a water softener because I've had to buy a water softener before. If there's a water softener on the property, it might be rented, it might be owned, it might be in the MLS as it's owned and it's really rented. If there's a water softener and there's a question on it, I would actually put it included in the purchase price on that, just to clear anything up there. So then also items not included, very important. This goes ahead and states not included in the purchase agreement. seller's personal property. So what this is stating is that the seller needs to have all their personal property off of the property when they sell it. And what I typically do here in following, I will put all personal property to be removed prior to closing on line 20, just to go ahead and make that clear. That way, if we're doing a final walkthrough and there are items that are left behind, we can go ahead and just point to the residential offer to purchase and say, hey, all personal property was supposed to be removed per the contract, and you can point right here. This next portion right here this next portion, it does a couple things. LP tanks. LP tanks can either be rented or they actually can be owned. So the real estate condition report in the state of Wisconsin goes ahead and clarifies that as well on there, but you're going to want to double check that. And they do have water softener in here as well, just to go ahead and give more caution to it. Lines 27 through 37, it goes ahead and talks about what's actually included. What is a fixture? So in general terms, a fixture is anything that's attached to the property that would do damage on the way out. So cabinetry, countertops, light fixtures, plumbing fixtures, those all stay with the property. Also with that is like plants. This is a big one, people plant. So when you go ahead and you have an accepted offer, you can't be taking out plants or trees or shrubs or grandma's rose bush. You got to go ahead and make sure if you want those in or out of the offer, they need to be addressed above on that. Curtain rods are included. The actual curtain itself, the rods are included, shades are included, that are all attached on that. So definitely want to go ahead and read through this section so you know what's staying and what is going. This next portion here is binding acceptance. And I want to explain what that is. So when you write your offer to purchase, you go ahead on line 41, you give the seller a certain amount of time to respond to the offer itself. Now, in a hot market, that could be 12 hours. It could be 24 hours. On a weekend, you might say 48 hours. It's all, this is a discussion you want to have with the buyer, and you're writing a good offer, you might want them to respond sooner than later. So let's say you go ahead on here, today's the 17th of the month, tomorrow's the 18th, you give them until the 18th of the month to respond. You can
ask a question.
Yeah.
I've had many times they don't abide
by that. So yeah. You need to go back and correct it then after the fact if they don't hit that timeline, right? Because it's not valid until you've said you're amending the binding acceptance to be whatever the new period is, right?
Jen, that's an excellent question. So this is what happens. So let's say you put the 18th down and they don't respond. At the time of the 18th, and what you can do too is you can go ahead and put 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock, because maybe you don't want to wait for a response till 9 o'clock at night. So you can put a timeline in there for the sanity of you and your client, unless it goes to just right before midnight. So let's say that timeline passes. This offer, this contract is now null and void. Now, what can happen though, it can be brought back to life at any time with a counteroffer. So let's say you go past this date and then the seller goes ahead, buyer's agent and seller goes and counters your offer. Now it's brought back to life. So then you don't have to amend anything here or do anything like that. Through the counteroffer, it's brought to life.
But it always has to be countered. I mean, what if they just happen to sign it the next day? I mean, you're past your binding acceptance, so it's expired.
Yep, as far as you have a null and void contract.
Okay, so it has to be countered.
You have a non-enforceable contract.
Okay,
that's that. Okay. Now here brings up another thing too, because Minnesota agents do this quite regularly, and you cannot do it in the state of Wisconsin. So let's say that binding acceptance date is the 17th of the month, and someone draws a line on that, all parties initial it, and they change the date. State of Wisconsin, you cannot do that.
Really?
You cannot alter this document that was sent over to you. You need to alter it in either an amendment or a counteroffer. So do not go ahead and do that. That is not standard practice in the state of Wisconsin, and it's not recognized.
Okay, I've got a question though. So if, I'm just going off Jen's question,
Yep.
if they do sign it the very next day and it's null and void, do you need to do an amendment or a counter, or how do you get it to just be okay?
Then you could go ahead, you can do an amendment where all parties sign it, saying that they're approving the changing of the binding acceptance to this date. Or you can go ahead and do it in a counter. One of the two. Both of them are satisfactory.
You said you can do it on the counter?
You can do it on the counter as well, yes. But you just, if once it goes past that date, this is a null and void contract that needs to be brought back to life. And it needs to be agreed upon by all parties. Great questions, you guys. Any other questions with that? Excellent.
Sorry, are we gonna get to counters? Like, will you go over that as well? And here's,
I don't know if we'll get through it today. As far
Okay.
as we want to go ahead and get through this document.
so can I, okay, then can I ask this because it's related to this? So if they countered, we all signed the counter, but I never got initials on the last page of the offer saying that there's a counter. And now we're going back today and doing it, even though they gave me a deadline of 10 o'clock last night. So like I said, we signed our counter by 10 o'clock last night, but I don't think she got initials from her buyers on the last few.
This is where you're in the process, you know, as the agent, as a representative of your client, to make sure that the documents are filled out correctly and there's a full line of transparency. So where it shows that it was countered and all of that. So if you receive a counter without the signed or the initials stating that it's countered on the last page of this document, that's your responsibility to reach out to that agent and say, hey, I need this signed immediately, initialed immediately. So
And we're in that process, but so then technically binding acceptance wouldn't be till today if she, I don't know if she got it or not. She was like, did I send it to you? And I'm like, no, you didn't. So I don't know if she's getting it or if she forgot to send it to me. But if she forgot to do it, and you're right, I didn't catch it last night. I was like, yep, get this counter signed. It was like 9 o'clock. We did 10 o'clock deadline. I'm like, let's just get it done. Yeah, so then we just need to go back and amend everything to make the deadlines all right, right?
that is correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you need a valid document where the dates and everything follow each other on that.
Okay.
The acceptance. So acceptance occurs when all buyers and sellers have a signed copy of the offer. They can be individual copies. They can be electronic copies as long as it's stated in the last page of the offer to purchase that we can go ahead and do electronic documents. But when everyone has a copy of the documents, we are good to go. Yay. Closing, line 48. This closing is to be closed on. This is your closing date. And then if you go ahead and read at the on line 49, at the place selected by the seller. So you go ahead, you put your closing date on here, and then per the offer to purchase, it says the place selected by the seller. Now you can change that in addendum A for the state of Wisconsin. But just so you know, in the document itself, it says by the seller. So let's say, this happens quite often, someone puts a date down and it's like President's Day, where it lands on a Saturday. Well, then it just, this per the document, it lands on the next business day. Lines 52 through 55. This is very important. And this is why you want to go ahead and go through this document with your clients, almost line for line, because it goes ahead and the knowledge in here is phenomenal. It kind of tells them what to do through the whole process. This right here talks about transferring a wire transfer and fraud. And it states in here that they should never go ahead and give out that information unless they're identifying someone, you know, via the phone, and they're both looking at an email and they're talking it through. So this is a title representative or a bank that they know who it is, or they're doing it in person with the title company. So just making sure that they don't respond to some general email out there with their finance information is very important. This is covered. All right, line 57, earnest money. Earnest money. Typically, the amount that we see here is about 1%. Can be more than that, can be less than that. I'm just giving a typical number on that. And this line 57 goes ahead and states accompanying this offer. So if you want to go ahead and make a really strong offer, your buyer wants to make a strong offer, you write that earnest money check and you're sending it with the offer to purchase itself. Don't see that all that often. What we usually see is line 59, and that's where you go ahead and you put in that 1% or whatever that dollar amount the buyer wants to put as earnest money, and then you deliver that within, this says 5 days if left blank. I think most commonly we see around 3 on that. And then on line 61, typically that is held by the listing firm. So then you would draw a line through the rest of this. If you're doing commercial, then a lot of times the third party, that an attorney may hold it, a title company may hold it in that end on a commercial property. But typically on residential real estate, the listing firm goes ahead and holds that itself. And then this, yes.
So this is even relevant to Minnesota.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of times they mail it in, it doesn't get delivered within 2 days. Say Wisconsin, what legally, if the earnest money doesn't come in on time,
Yes.
what ramifications are there?
So if it's mailed in, it's the stamp on the letter.
Okay.
So what I'd go ahead, in that case, you'd want to go ahead, not only make a copy of the check, but make a copy of the stamped letter. So you have that to go ahead and prove that you have it. Also, as far as an agent itself, you cannot be holding earnest money. You have 24 hours to go ahead and get that into our hands, in the office hands on that end of it. Now, let's say you get that earnest money late, okay? Well, it says in the contract that all dates and deadlines need to be met. At that time, you need to create an amendment extending that time from 3 days or 5 days or whatever you had in there to 7 days or 10 days. So that this document is being fulfilled and everything in there is being done. Questions with that, Mark?
Nope, that's what I kind of wanted to know.
Excellent. This next portion in here is earnest money. A couple of things to know on earnest money. One, earnest money is held by, well, in this case, we put listing broker, the listing broker. The listing broker has no control over the earnest money. They need to be told what to do from buyer and seller in order to distribute earnest money. So if there's ever a discussion, the buyer thinks they should have the earnest money, the seller thinks they should have an earnest money, it didn't close, and they're blaming one another and they're both asking for it, it is not the brokerage job to go ahead and play judge or jury or anything like that on who gets it. We actually need to go ahead and need written approval to go ahead and send that earnest money out. Written approval could be a couple things. One, buyer and seller agree where that earnest money goes, then they sign a cancellation of mutual release, and it allows the listing firm to release that. Let's say buyer and seller aren't able to go ahead and come into terms. You see this 60 days right here? So after 60 days, if buyer and seller are fighting over earnest money, the broker, the firm, can go ahead and reach out to an attorney for a fee that does not exceed $250 and say, here's all the documents. Can you go ahead and please tell us what to do with this earnest money? And then the attorney gives an opinion on where that should go. Then we send that out to both buyers and sellers, and they have 30 days to go ahead and respond to that letter that we send out. If they don't respond at that time, then we can go ahead, the broker can go ahead and release those funds. But that's how it works. Obviously, you do not want to go ahead and go down that road if you don't have to. It's 90 days of your life that buyer, seller, and agents will never get back. Excellent. Any questions with that? Perfect. Seeing none. Time is of the essence. All dates and deadlines need to be met. Even number one, earnest money payments. It's a big one. Needs to be in on time. If it's not in on time, it needs to be okayed by everyone on that. Binding acceptance. That's that first date that we went ahead and talked to. States that these dates need to go ahead and be met. Real estate condition report. Real estate condition report. The seller goes ahead, fills that out to the best of their abilities, and The buyer goes ahead and reviews it. When you're writing the offer and you're reviewing it, that real estate condition report should have a date. You should put that date on here. And then also if there's any other, let's say if they had a home inspection or anything like that, you can put that down here as well. What we're stating here is that the buyer went ahead and received this information and viewed it. Again, these blanks on top as well, put the address of the property. It just keeps everything flowing.
Can I ask a question about the real estate condition report?
Yes,
A lot
ma'am.
of times they're not online, and I've
Yep.
been told, and I've done, where I say our offer is contingent upon receipt and acceptance within 3 days. Is that okay to do?
Yes, well, and in here as well, line 104, buyer who does not receive a report within 10 days may within 2 days of the 10-day period rescind the contract.
Perfect.
So it's already stated in there as well that they have 10 days to go ahead and look at it and 2 business days to, to end the contract once they get it. Now here's the deal. You as a seller or a buyer, you want that real estate condition report when you're writing the offer. It's more knowledge for the buyer as they go ahead and they're writing their offer. And clarity is power. So you definitely want to see if you can get that. Now, not all the time that they should have that. If you're working with a good agent, I'm letting you know right now, they should have that for you so you can write your offer in a strong offer. Page 3 is all definitions of the real estate condition report that are in there. So I'll let you go ahead and read through that at your own time. Inspections and testings. This goes ahead, this goes with the inspection contingency. What it states in this portion is that if you go ahead and you check on the inspection contingency, you're okay to inspect the property. You're not okay to go ahead and do testing unless you have that in the offer to purchase. So like, let's say if you're doing an inspection of the property and you didn't go ahead and say that you're going to do a radon test and you do a radon test, you do not have permission to do that. So that's another document that you need to go ahead and check off on. So an inspection means an inspection of that, not a test. Any questions with that? All right, this next portion here talks about the inspection itself. Now, in the state of Wisconsin, the individual doing the inspection needs to be a registered or Wisconsin licensed home inspector. It can't be their brother, sister, cousin, handyman that wants to just look at a house. Now, if they're registered and they're licensed, absolutely, they can go ahead and do that. But as far as it needs to be a registered or licensed Wisconsin home inspector to go ahead and do that on that end. Now, this next portion in here, line 207, this goes ahead and states how many days after acceptance, so which is very important. So let's say you get it accepted on the 17th, day 1 is the 18th. Now this says 15 days if left blank. That seems like a long time to me. I would go ahead, we want to get this wrapped up right away. My suggestion would have it sooner, 7 to 10 days. A lot of things can happen in 15 days with the home inspection. So I would say get that more towards 7 or 10.
Is Wisconsin calendar days?
Wisconsin is calendar days. Yes. Excellent question. Also in here, it goes ahead and says right to cure. Seller shall have the right to cure or shall not. All right. What does that actually mean? If you go ahead and you strike out shall not, and it says seller shall have the right to cure, whatever comes out on that inspection, you can go ahead and ask that seller to go ahead and fix it. And they have the opportunity, what this means is they have the opportunity to fix it. They can decline to fix it and make the offer null and void, or they can fix it. So they have the opportunity there to do it. So really what it's saying is we're going to kind of renegotiate the contract. Also in here, you can say shall not have the right to cure. So that means that if you go ahead and you go through and you find some defects in the property, you can go ahead and make note of that and give notice that you are canceling this agreement because they do not have the right to cure, and both parties are going to go ahead and move on.
So is it more advantageous if you're upping the buyer to say shall not, because then you can deliver a notice of defects and get out of it easier? Not that we're trying to get out of it, but I'm just saying if they're really concerned about stuff, are you better doing shall not?
Jen, it's really the temperature of your buyer on what they want to do there and how they feel about the property.
Like if you know it's a fixer upper,
Yeah.
you're probably better off doing shall not, right? In case you get a bunch of stuff that you're like, this just isn't going to work.
Well, if you know it's a fixer upper, then maybe you shouldn't be writing the offer though too, if you're not a fixer upper buyer on that. So it's the whole buyer, because we could go back and forth on all of this. It's whatever the buyer wants. Do you want the seller to have the right to cure? If you're in competition, shall not might get you out of there. It might go in, well, we're not going to accept this.
Okay.
These buyers won't even work with us if there's, if there's something wrong. If they find something, we'd be more than, the seller could be like, we'll be more than happy to fix it. We just don't know of anything. But if there's 3 offers on the table and 2 people are saying shall, and 1 person is saying shall not, just from talking with sellers, that shall not is probably not even going to get accepted.
Okay, that makes sense.
So,
Got a question.
Jared,
Yeah.
219, what do you tend to put in there for seller to respond online? How many days you tend
I
to
would say 2 to 3.
2 to 3? And then the question, you've got a lot of experience doing this. The whole line 221, curing the defects in a good and workmanlike manner. I mean, that has, so the buyers trust in the seller to have that done. Have you ever had issues with the quality of work of something being done? I mean,
I don't know. I think that, Craig, that brings up that's a great question. A couple things with that. One, the sellers always want to go ahead and have anything fixed at the very least amount of money that it's going to cost them. And
Right.
the buyers want to go ahead and have it done by the most expensive professional that you could imagine. And on that front. So it's, you call an electrician to go ahead and, if you're calling a licensed electrician, a lot of times we'll go ahead and people put the word licensed. We're having a licensed electrician come out to fix the GFIs or to ground the gas pipe. So they're not doing it, themselves.
so where would you put that word if you said, good and workmanlike manner? If it isn't required, like there's some things that a handyman can do that maybe requires plumbing stuff, where do you put in there any work to be done by a licensed electrician or licensed plumber?
Once the inspection is completed, at that time you would either write an amendment or a notice, which we'll get down here, that's our next thing. And in that, then we would go ahead and put from a licensed contractor.
So you're saying the notice would override the quality of good and workmanlike by putting it in the notice? You can do that? Because this says just good and workmanlike, but you're doing the defect notice, and in there you're able to designate sort of a higher standard in a sense, or?
You could, yeah, because you're negotiating. You're renegotiating the contract.
Okay, now I'm saying you've signed off where seller has the right to cure.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hey, Jared.
Yeah.
Okay, another question. So if you do the seller shall, can the buyer still back out or not?
Let's say you say the seller shall, and there are defects in the foundation of the property. And so you go ahead, you go through, the inspector goes through and says, all right, these are the defects. Now, with that, in actually above here, when it talks about inspections, so if there needs to be further inspections done by a professional, that up above on this page, if further inspections need to be done by a professional, so now we need to get an engineer or a foundation expert to come visit the property to say what the solution is. Then they go ahead, they would come up with the solution, and then the buyer would give notice on what they would want done to go ahead to give them the right to cure, they would have to go ahead and make it right to the engineer and the inspector, standard on that front. And then it would be the seller's decision to do it. I can give an example of this and what happened. So buyer goes ahead and looked at the house. This is an actual thing that happened about 12 years ago. Buyer went ahead and looked at the house, went through the inspection, and was like, oh my gosh, we're buying this really expensive house. And it siding shot, roof shot, all these things are just, they're done. Well, they went ahead and they gave notice, and they put every single thing possible that they could imagine that needed to be done with that house, including siding, roof, you name it, it was asked for. And came back to the seller, and the seller's like, I really want to sell this house. So they signed it. And that buyer got new siding, new roof, new all of this stuff, and both parties were happy. Now, a lot of times the seller would say, hey, no, I'm not doing all this stuff. You're buying it as is. Go away, and we'll put it back on the market.
In Minnesota, it basically, there's a time frame for you to bring up issues from inspection and resolve them.
Yep.
So if you're going back and forth, like you present to this, you present this amendment to the purchase agreement to the seller, we want these things done, and you're going back and forth, like you said, it's another negotiation. Is there a time frame limit on that if you're negotiating that's specified in here that we haven't seen, or is it on that other form?
So it's line 219. So once the buyer goes ahead and delivers notice, that if you put 3 days in there, 4 days, whatever date you put in there, that's the time to go ahead and to have those discussions. You do want to give them some time in case they have to go ahead and call. They might have to call an inspector, not an inspector, but a plumber or an electrician just to get a bid so they know how much it's going to cost them.
Gotcha.
So on that, couple things with this. So let's say you go ahead and you have a couple things that come up through the inspection. You send an amendment over saying, fix this, fix that, you're negotiating. So you're going back and forth and stuff like that. The amendment it's not a notice. So you're not playing hardball at that time. A notice goes ahead and says, these are the items that need to be fixed, and have them fixed by, a licensed contractor. If it's easy, it's up to your buyer on what they want to put there. But a notice says you need to fix them, or this offer is null and void. Amendment says we're just talking right now. But one of the things you want to go ahead and make sure that you don't do is go past on line 207. Let's say you have 10 days on there and it goes to day 11, and then you send a notice or you send an amendment and it's day 11. Listing agent can go ahead and say, this is no longer contingent upon the inspection. You let all those timelines go. I'm sorry, my seller's not going to go ahead and do any of those items. And you're going to say, oh, but the wiring's bad. Well, it's no longer contingent upon that because the days have passed.
Okay, but if you, on day 10, and it's your day 10, whatever, you send any, notice or a amendment and they don't sign it that day, are you still on the hook for stuff because they didn't sign it?
Well, if you send an amendment doesn't mean anything in this, unless all parties sign on it. So if you sent amendment on day 10 and no one signed it or did anything with it, and it's day 11 now, the whole inspection contingency is passed. It's done. Now, if you send a notice, the notice states these are the items that need to be fixed. Then the seller puts everything in the seller's hand. Seller has how many days you put on line 219 to say if they'll do it or don't do it.
Okay.
So let's say they get a better offer in those 3 days, or someone says, I really want this property. I'll pay you $10,000 more, and you give notice. They can go ahead and say, no, we're not going to cure these defects. And they go with the other buyer. So you want to have a conversation here with all parties. Another thing too, and we'll talk about the definition of defect here in a little bit, but that's a little different. For those that are familiar with the state of Minnesota, it's a little bit different in the state of Wisconsin. All right, radon, line 230, radon tests. So if you're having a radon test, you want to go ahead and check this box. You want to do that within, this says 20 days if it's left blank. I like to speed all of these up Also, when you're talking with your buyers and going through this, it's 4.0 PCI/else. Okay. So if you go ahead and you do an inspection, it comes back at 3.9999999, let them know that they will not be getting a system. If it comes back at 4, if you go ahead and you give the right to cure, then they're probably going to get a system if the seller okays it. Also, when you're going through this document with your sellers, same thing. If that's 3.9999 and you have the right to cure, well, we don't have to put in a system. It's not above that 4. If it's exactly at 4, well, this states we're putting in a system. Have those conversations right from the get-go. So you're not having them after the radon test. Good?
Yeah.
Excellent. Financial commitment contingency. All right, when you're filling out this, I strongly, highly recommend that you go ahead and you fill it out with the loan officer and your client. Go ahead and give them a call and go through these. What it does, it gives clarity to the loan officer of what is expected of them and timelines. Also gives clarity to the buyer as well. So they get to go through those items again. So line 250, all what you're stating here is what type of loan it is. Is it a VA, FHA, conventional? And then as far as with that, you will go ahead and have a commitment within so many days after acceptance of this offer. Now to get a commitment, this is why I like to talk to a loan officer. Is it going to take the loan officer 25 days to get the commitment, 30 days, 35 days? What does that look like? Get that from them, because then you're holding them to their standard, not an arbitrary date that we put in there. Also on line 252, this is where you put the loan amount, not less than dollar amount on there. And as far as for so many years, how many years are they going to go ahead and have the term of the loan, and how many years is it going to be amortized for? Get that from the lender. One of the things that in the state of Wisconsin we don't do is put to be determined. Because in here, the seller has the right to be the bank. And so if you go ahead and put to be determined, then the seller can go ahead and determine what those numbers should be on that. It's a potential, not that I've ever seen it happen or anything like that, but you definitely want to put numbers in here, go through with the loan officer on that. Okay. Line 271, this is very important. A lot of people actually miss this. Satisfaction of financial commitment contingency. All right, so let's say we put 30 days there up here on line 251. We put 30 days. We'll have full loan commitment within 30 days. So before that 30-day period hits, you need to go ahead as the buyer's agent, be talking with that loan officer and making sure that we get everything satisfied so we can go ahead and move forward. So how to remove the financial contingency? The time period's coming up. 1, you need a commitment letter from the lender. That commitment letter also needs to be signed by the buyer. The commitment letter itself. Also with that, you need to go ahead and give notice that you're removing the financial contingency. And you use a notice on that. And with that notice, you write that in there, and that also needs to be signed by the buyer. This is why this is important. 1, it keeps the loan officer on track. Hey, are we ready to close? So we have a happy closing for both buyer and seller, and we've done our work. 2, day 31 comes up. Seller can give notice to the buyer that if they do not go ahead and remove their financial contingency, that this contract is null and void. I've seen it happen twice. One on a commercial land deal where someone else found out that the property was under contract and thought that that person got a good deal, and someone wrote a different contract, put it in secondary position, hoping that somewhere down the line the buyer would drop the ball. They did on the financial contingency, so that owner of the property got rid of that buyer in first position because they did not satisfy the financial commitment, and then put in the other party. So that's a big one. And I had it happen with a client of ours that they at first wanted to sell their house and then decided they didn't want to sell the house and it was under contract. So they went ahead and used this section of the offer to purchase to get out of it, essentially with help from an attorney. Questions with that? And the seller termination rights on line 282. So let's say that buyer isn't able to get the financing that they put above. This is the portion right here that states that the seller can go ahead and match those terms if you wanted them to. That's, or him or her to, by checking that box. Let's say there's not a financial contingency. This goes ahead and says there's not a financial contingency within so many days, 7 if left blank, that the buyer needs to deliver to the seller from a third-party financial institution, just something that says that they're good to go. They have the money. Appraisal contingency. So you want the house to appraise, you want the property to appraise, you check this button, you check this right here, and then you put within so many days. Again, I would talk to the lender on that. And I like to, just on a personal note, I like to have the appraisal contingency and the financial contingency on the same day. That way I'm only drafting one notice or one amendment, depending on what all took place on that, to keep it clean. This also says right to cure. The seller shall have the right to cure if you want them to, if it does not appraise. So that what it states there is you would give notice, you'd give the appraisal, and then within 5 days, the seller needs to go ahead and deliver back to the buyer what's going on, if they'll go ahead and reduce the price.
So that's seller's option. So they can, if they check that, if they put that in there, it's only go if they send a notice within 5 days that they are going to match it, but they're not required to match it, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. You got it. And another thing too, as far as kind of go backwards a little bit, on the home inspection and the inspection contingency, it does state that that the buyer is supposed to go ahead and present the inspection, the paperwork, the results of it.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you have to provide it in Wisconsin, right? That's right.
You do. Sometimes I've had it in the past. I'm not saying if it's right or wrong, but the seller won't accept it, or the seller's agent won't accept it because they just don't want to see it.
Yeah, they don't want it on the record because if they're moving away from that offer.
Yeah. So I'm not saying if that's right or wrong. I'm just saying as far as I've seen that on that.
If
So
you don't, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
If you don't have anything that you're going to ask for as a result of the inspection, do you still need to present the report?
It's not commonly done. I can say I don't know if I've ever seen one sent if everyone's all good with everything.
Okay.
On that. Excellent question. Line 330, closing of buyer's property contingency. So this is if your buyer has a property to sell in order to go ahead and purchase the property that they're looking at. So here on line 331 is you would put the address of the property that they need to sell. And then on line 332 is where you would go ahead and put the date that they need to sell it by. So in here, if it goes past this date on line 332, this offer is null and void, unless both buyer and seller agree to extend that date. Also, some of the terminology you may want to use for your buyer if you're writing an offer and you're using this contingency on an open space on the offer to purchase. So if on the last page, to go ahead and write on here that once the buyer property contingency is removed, this offer is still contingent upon a successful closing of the property. And then put the same address as of line 331. The reason you can do that is because some offers fall apart.
Yes.
Yep. And that protects your buyer on that. The bump clause. So,
Hey, Jared,
yes.
line 335, tail end, last three words, delivery of verification or
Yeah.
proof of bridge loan shall not extend the closing date for this offer. Is that, I'm looking at that. So you could provide a bridge loan that can prove that they can close, but you still have to, all is that saying you still have to stay within the closing date that was originally accepted? That's all. Is
That is correct, Craig.
okay.
Yep. Yeah, right on.
All right.
So bump clause, line 337. So the bump clause, this is how this works. You go ahead when you're writing, line 330, you're filling that out, then you put the bump clause in there. Now the bump clause is the seller can go ahead and bump the buyer on this. So a lot of times this says 72 hours if left blank. So this is what happens. The buyer writes an offer on the listing, gets accepted, contingent upon the sale of their house. Seller still continues to show the property and look for offers. Seller receives a secondary offer from a buyer. It has to be a secondary offer. You cannot have two primary buyers. So you have a secondary offer on that. Once that's accepted, seller goes ahead and gives notice to the buyer that says, we have accepted a secondary offer. We're putting the bump clause in effect. So once the buyer receives that notice, the 72-hour period starts. So during that 72-hour, the buyer, if they want to move forward, must go ahead and waive their property contingency. That's on line 330. And also go ahead and they need to provide proof of a bridge loan or proof of something satisfying that they have the finances to go ahead and move forward. And then they stay in primary position. They're not able to go ahead and do that and move forward on the closing of the property, then as far as parties need to go ahead and if it's agreeable, need to sign cancellation, some mutual releases and move on.
Okay, go back to your previous situation where you had the financial clause in there. The buyer has satisfied it, but later in the purchase agreement, towards the end, they have put in subject to a successful sale of their house. Is that still bumpable? Is that considered bumpable too?
It's an excellent question. I would call your local attorney to find an answer to that. Yeah, because they contradict one another, don't they? With that, that's an excellent question. That would have to go ahead and it would need clarifying.
Okay.
On all parties, because there is a point of goodwill. So, I mean, if a buyer goes ahead and says they're going to go ahead and purchase and close on this date, and then they remove all this, but leave that section in there with no intentions to close, as a real estate agent, if you know for a fact that your client has no intention of closing or hitting that date, you need to go ahead and notify all parties at all time.
Yeah, we're required legally to do it, but I'm saying, let's say you get down there and their closing falls apart within the last few days, and is that clause still in there? So they're in good faith doing it, but something happens. Okay.
You're providing a bridge loan, which goes ahead and takes the sale of the property out of it.
Got it.
So, I mean, if we want to get really, really technical, you could say, hey, yep, I have the financing to do it, but we have this. But once the closing date passes, again, this is null and void.
Okay. But the seller, somebody's got to fill in those when we're writing. So the bump clause, so I'm writing the purchase agreement.
Yes.
And obviously you're primarily a listing agent. So obviously you do both, but that's your skill set. So what normally does a buyer's agent fill in? What do they normally put in there? And maybe and what do you normally want to change and counter back if you're the listing agent? Just curious. I don't know if that made sense, but.
As far as, we're looking for 72 hours.
Okay.
on that. And then as far as proof of a bridge loan financing and the property, the property address that they're selling, and no later than. So a date like, 65 days out, 90 days out, something like that.
So line 33 has to be filled in a Wisconsin purchase agreement. It can't be left blank. Is that what you're saying? Correct?
Line 33 or
337.
337. Oh, it could just be contingent upon their sale without a bump clause. But if you're representing the seller,
You're going to come back. Okay.
you'd probably want to come back with that bump clause.
I think the bump clause is what makes every Minnesota agent's knees shake or shudder, because they're just like, oh, that bump, nobody gets it. So,
Yeah, well, this might help out on line 350. This is a secondary offer. So if you check this box, what this means is there's already a primary offer on this property. And so with that, someone has an offer on it, contingent, let's say in this case, it's contingent on a sale of the house. And we're writing a secondary offer to sit in secondary position from the primary. Now in here, we also state on line 354 that we will stay in secondary position for so many days. Now they say if it's left blank 7 days. The reason why it says that we'll stay in secondary position for so many days is because the seller needs that time period to get rid of the primary buyer if possible. So if the primary buyer, they have to go ahead and put their bump clause to work. So they need 72 hours for that. So once that goes ahead and happens, then they can elevate the secondary offer into primary position.
okay,
That
Jerry,
secondary offer cannot go ahead and pull or withdraw their offer until so many days are up. That's on line 354.
okay, my question would be, when I'm going to show a property in Wisconsin,
Yes.
is there, remind me, is there some designation or something in the information on the listing that tells me that there is already an offer accepted? Or is there, if I find that out, am I allowed to ask and the question answered, how many days are in that bump clause? So is it 72 or is it 96? You know what I mean? How many days does the buyer have to wait? Because that's something a buyer might want to know. So what is an agent required to disclose about their listing in Wisconsin, either at the time of showing or if I'm going to write an offer, and what question can I ask and what question can be answered?
Any question can be answered with permission from the seller. So as long as the agent has permission from the seller to go ahead and disclose certain things, they can. Now, obviously, confidentiality needs to be met on that. So typically, you're not going to see people disclose too much of what's in a contract on that, because it's confidential information. So a lot of times the agent will say, hey, as far as much time as, if you're in a secondary offer, the more days you put in here, the stronger that's going to go ahead and look on that. But as far as what they can share, what they can't share, that's between their client and the agent on that. A lot of times you'll see when you look on the MLS, it'll go ahead and be accepted other or accepted bump.
Yeah.
And it'll say Wisconsin on it. That's pretty much telling you there's a bump clause on it. And then I'd reach out to that agent for clarity.
So the listing has a bump clause, or only an offer can have a bump clause, not a listing? Okay, so I got it. All right.
Homeowners Association, line 357, state of
Before
Wisconsin.
we go on, secondary offer. If you're the buyer in secondary position, you can't make offers on other houses, right?
It depends on how much money you have. If you can go ahead and if you can buy several properties and are approved to buy several properties, then you can go ahead and purchase several properties. If you're not, you cannot go ahead and, if you're writing, this is one of the things when, let's say you're struggling over earnest money on where it can go and you're in primary position, you're still in an offer to purchase until you get a cancellation mutual release. So it's really hard to go ahead and look for another house and move on if you're still legally required to purchase another house. So you almost got to be able to afford two. It's also for the listing agent, if you're in, let's say struggle for earnest money, you can't really go ahead and accept another offer and put them in primary position until you have the original buyer out. So there is some, definite.
So it's not smart to make secondary offers is kind of where I'm going with that, right? Because they would need to be able to, they have to commit to that one and stay committed to that one until whatever blank on 354 has lapsed, right?
Yep. Yeah. So if that's 5 days, 7 days, if it's their dream house and they want to sit there, a lot of times with this, it's having a conversation with the listing agent.
Mm-hmm.
Why
just
can't you write a
information you can get.
If you're in secondary position, maybe this is what she was asking, I don't know, it's what I heard, but it may be different, but if you're in secondary position and you go to write another secondary position, why can't you write in the second offer, this is subject to us being canceled out of our secondary position on this other property? You could do that, right?
You absolutely could.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could. Absolutely. Yep. Lines 357 to 360, homeowners association, state of Wisconsin, we definitely have them. And this just goes ahead and states if there's any fees with the transfer out of the seller's name into the buyer's name, that if neither is strike, the buyer's going to go ahead and take care of them. Closing prorations. So things are prorated. Most popular thing that's prorated in the state of Wisconsin, if you're out in the country, is propane. So how does that, real estate taxes are we'll talk about real estate taxes here in a second. I did want to cover propane though. Propane, how that works is you go ahead, day of the final walkthrough or a little bit before that, you have the tank read. So how you read the tank is there is a percentage gauge when you open up the cover of the tank, and that percentage gauge says what percent of the tank is full. So let's say you're looking at a 500-gallon tank and you'll read the gauge, and that gauge, and I suggest you take a picture of whatever that number is with your phone, but that gauge reads 50%. That means that there's 250 gallons of propane in that tank. Next, we want to go ahead and get a invoice from the seller on how much they paid for that propane. And then the buyer goes ahead and buys that propane in a manner that the title companies and banks are approve of from that seller. So let's say they paid $1 a gallon. I'm just making a number for easy math, and it's at 50% in a 500-gallon tank. That buyer owes the seller $250. Any questions with that? Excellent. Real estate taxes. All right. Proration of real estate taxes. Taxes in the state of Wisconsin are paid in arrears. It's not pay as you go. You're paying from arrears. What this means is you receive your tax bill in second week of December. So for the year 2020, if you live in Wisconsin, you receive your tax bill second week of December, and that's your taxes for 2020. The state allows you to go ahead and pay half by January 31st, the other half by the end of July on that. So the box you want to typically check is line 368 right here. You want to check that one. That's just saying it'll be prorated and set up from the day of the closing. Yay. All good. Let's say you're purchasing a brand new construction in the state of Wisconsin. This is where you want to be careful. So taxes are done in arrears. You can have a brand new house that looks beautiful. Last year's taxes was $250. They're buying a $500,000 house. They buy that property in July, and all of a sudden they get the tax bill in December, and that tax bill is now $7,000. And you prorated a couple $100 on that. It's a phone call you don't want. So with new construction, you definitely want to go ahead and look at 372. And that's where you go ahead and you take the sales price, multiply it by all the multipliers, fair market value, go to the county to get all of this information. Title company can help you do the calculation. And that's one way to get a fair dollar amount there. Line 374 is you just popping in a number. Line 379 is an interesting one. This says that buyer and seller agree to get together once the new buyer receives the tax bill, and they'll prorate it from there. I don't know about you guys, but getting buyer and seller together after several months to have the seller write a check for the buyer, I don't know is a great idea or not. So my personal belief is to stay away from that one. Any questions? Excellent. Line 386. 386, and moving on to the next place, all talks about title. Go ahead, review it. This states that the seller needs to go ahead and give free and clear title to the buyer without any liens or encumbrances on it. Lease property, if any of the portion of the property is leased, it just states that buyer needs to go ahead and get any written or oral lease agreements and those terms. And any of the security deposits that have been paid are given to the buyer at the time of closing.
Hey, Jared, on title, what's the difference between Wisconsin and Minnesota? I know you don't do Minnesota per se, but as far as the seller paying and buyer paying, is there a simple difference typically, or like taxes? Or I'll read through it, but.
Yeah, definitely read through it as far as it's something that, whoops, sorry about that. That's Mrs. Kranz. The seller goes ahead and pays for that. Well, pays for a portion of that. It is different than the state of Minnesota on that. So that's we're running a little bit behind, and I want to get through this for you guys. All right, with this, some definitions for you. Business days are calendar days, not including Saturday or Sunday or any holidays. Dates and deadlines, they need to be met. Defects. All right, this is a good one to go through with your buyers when you're writing an offer to purchase. A defect, so we have an inspection, we're asking for something to go ahead and be fixed. This is what a defect is. It's a significant adverse effect that would affect the value of the property. It would affect either the health or safety of the occupants, or if not repaired or removed or replaced, it would significantly shorten the lifespan of the premises. It's not a honey-do list, it's a defect. Does it affect the value? Does it affect the safety or health? If not taken care of, will it shorten the lifespan of the property? That's what a defect is in the state of Wisconsin. Questions with that? Excellent. Firm, that's the broker. The open boxes in the state of Wisconsin, you either want to check it or put NA in it. You can leave it blank as well, but I prefer an NA. Property dimensions and surveys, it states right on here that they're approximate. So buyer needs to go ahead and take a look at the sizes, dimensions of the rooms, all of that, make sure that they're good with it. Property damage between accepted offer and closing. So this is a big one. Seller goes ahead, sells her property, gets an accepted offer, and is all done now. They don't cut the grass. They don't do anything to the property for 3 months because of, they have an accepted offer now. This states in here that they need to maintain and keep up the property. Also, if any damage is done, so they're moving a couch out and they pop, they tear some carpet, they drag it, they tear some carpet, they need to fix it. The property needs to be in the same condition as when the buyers wrote the offer. Also, it states in here, let's say there's damage more than 5% of the property value. There was a fire. Buyers can go ahead and null and void this document. The property damage, one example I can go ahead and give is it was in the springtime and ice dam started to melt and there was a great big wet spot on the ceiling. And I got a phone call the day before the closing from the seller saying, hey, there's a big wet spot on the ceiling, Jared, but don't worry about it. I went to Menards and I just got a 5-gallon paint of Kills and I'm just going to leave that here for the buyer so they can take care of it. No, that you have to go ahead. The property needs to be in the same condition as it was when they walked through. And now we know there's a defect, so we have to go ahead and refill out the real estate condition report stating that we had an ice dam and it caused water damage on that front. Line 481, buyer pre-closing walkthrough. The buyer has a couple times to visit the property once you have an accepted offer. Inspections, they can go ahead and go to the inspections. And also 3 days prior to the closing, they can go ahead and walk through the property, make sure the property's in the condition that it's supposed to be. Occupancy, day of the closing, seller goes ahead, gets a check, buyers get the keys. Default, buyers and sellers, they're entering into a legal binding contract on that. If they don't perform on that contract, there's cause and effect. There's effects there on that. This also goes ahead and states that as well in lines 500 to 512 that they're entering into a contract. The sexual offenders registry, there's a phone number and a website that the buyers and sellers can go on to see if there's anyone registered in the area. Foreign investors, so if you go ahead and the seller is a foreign investor, there is some tax requirements that may have to go ahead and happen, and then talks about it in this section right here. Lines 537 to 541, this is where you would write in any other provisions that your buyer may want. Delivery is important here. And these are some things that I see other people go ahead and write on these offer to purchases. And what you want to do here, seller's recipient. Typically you would put the listing agent's name and firm here. Buyer's recipient, if you're writing this offer, you'd put your name and firm here. Those two are filled. Fax machine, welcome to 2020. Don't NA. Commercial delivery, we don't see that much. US mail, we don't see that much. Lines 557 and 558. Both of these need to go ahead and be filled out here, either there or up above for personal delivery. This is why these need to be filled out. So the seller is the listing agent. The listing agent's email address you want to put here. Buyer agent, that's you. If you're writing the offer, you put that there. If you cannot deliver this document, you cannot have acceptance of this document. So if you leave any of these blank and there's nowhere to send it to, there's no binding acceptance. So this needs to be filled out to have a binding legal document. This is where you put the email addresses. Sorry, a little ahead of myself here. Any questions with that? Because that's really important. And I've seen this when reviewing docs, I've seen this blank a couple of times. And if it is, there's no way to legally deliver anything. Seeing none. The line 563, this is where you want to put the real estate condition report, addendum A, addendum B, anything that you're attaching to this offer to purchase. You're the one drafting it, put your name and firm on there, and then get the signatures and send it out. If the sellers are accepting the offer, they sign. This is different from the state of Minnesota. Only if they're accepting the offer, they sign here. If they're countering it or rejecting it, then they initial. And there is your residential offer to purchase. Any questions?
What's the biggest, you're as a listing agent, what's the most common stuff that just comes at you? I mean, you pretty much hit it. Anything else that you just didn't mention that you can think of that you go, that's a oops, you know, it's to my benefit, I'm not going to mention it. Do you see anything, Minnesota agents crossing the border or anything else, stuff that they do?
Some of the biggest differences that I see is not filling out those email addresses.
Okay.
And so it's impossible to get a legally binding contract on that. So that's probably one. Number two would be crossing things out and initialing, which we can't do in the state of Wisconsin on that. So that would be number two. Number three would be in the financial contingency, a whole bunch of to be determines on that. So as far as from Minnesota to Wisconsin, what I see, those are the three of the biggest. Fourth would be, I believe in the Minnesota purchase agreement, appliances are kind of listed on there. And on the state of Wisconsin, they are not. So if you put refrigerator down and you go and do the final walkthrough the last day and there's no refrigerator there, guess who's buying a refrigerator?
Minnesota doesn't have appliances, but it does have, you know, curtains and drapes that didn't used to be on there. all the attached stuff. But even if the appliances are in the MLS of Minnesota, you got to put them in the PA still.
Okay, so that's
Unless it's built in, which attached like a Sub-Zero or something like that.
absolutely excellent. Any other questions that anyone can think of?
Hey, Jared, bill of
Yeah.
sale, can that be part of a purchase agreement, or is that something signed at closing?
It absolutely can. So bill of sale is something that you would put on the last page as an attachment. And then you could go ahead and put those items there like swing sets and all of that good stuff. One of the things too, as far as with swing sets and yard ornaments, you definitely want to go ahead and get clarity on that. Because the swing set could be either dug into the ground and held down with like piers, or it could be just sitting on top and all of a sudden you don't see them there anymore. So, and same thing with storage sheds. So a lot of these storage sheds are on skid plates where you can go ahead and you can lift them up, put them on a trailer and drive them away. And some have footings and stay. So that's a great place there, Mr. Duffy, to go ahead and put that on a bill of sale for clarity.
And then everyone signs that. That's part of
Everyone-
the agreement.
Yep, absolutely.
But don't let the lender see it.
Of course.
And as far as this is being recorded, so we definitely, as far as if we can get the title company and the loan officer to go ahead and okay everything, that's awesome.
Or put it in at $0. I've had to do that before too.
Yep, absolutely.
Like the following swing set, whatever, at 0.
Awesome. Yep, most definitely. Any other questions? These are great questions, you guys. Was this helpful?
Yes, very.
All right, we'll do this once a month, towards the
idea.
middle of the month. And the next time, do you want me to go through like the addendum Bs and As and counter offers, or do you want me to go through a listing agreement?
Let's
With the agreement.
with this.
Or yeah, whatever.
A and B.
Okay,
Stick with buyers.
Okay, we'll stick with the buyer's end of it. That'll be our next one. And then after that, we'll go right to the listing side.
Perfect.
All right, you guys, thank you for everything you do.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jared.
Yep, see ya.